just, I'm like,
So obviously this essay was more along the lines of, the teleology of things that we observe in nature, particularly protection mechanisms. I had it bookmarked.
59.
Page 59.
Yeah.
Thank you. There we go. I thought the essay got really good, particularly at the end where he asks the question, on the other hand, how does this observation fit in with creation design theories? So it seemed like most of the essay was kind of just attacking naturalism and evolution without really giving so much of a positive argument in favor of design. I suppose because it's implicit. In the issues that he's pointing out. If you enjoyed this essay, I think you'd really enjoy William Paley's Natural Theology. He wrote a book, I think it was in the 19th century, called Natural Theology. And the whole book is just one long series of observations about telos or teleology in nature. Things like, look at the way a lobster's tail articulates, look at the design inherent in that, and how it just seems so obvious that there's a designer behind that because it's so elegant and beautiful. And the whole book just goes through thing after thing after thing after thing after thing. William Paley's known for the watchmaker argument, so if you're familiar with that, that's your guy.
Yeah, I think that part of that criticism is just the nature of the shortened, truncated essay. It takes a while to get through the complexity of the issue.
True.
And,
True.
If you're not going to go 30 pages, then, you've got to kind of condense
Tell that
Dan
some of
this.
Dan Wallace in his essay on the historical reliability of the scripture was just like, even just the footnotes, he had like 3 pages. But yeah, you're right.
But the thing that I guess comes to my mind with reading this and stuff is, you can isolate some of the factors in abiogenesis and make it seem halfway plausible, but when you combine all of the hurdles involved, it becomes very, very apparent that design was required and a miraculous event took place.
Yeah, he says that here at the end. He's like, one could argue that given enough time, these protection mechanisms could evolve, but the simultaneous evolution of several elaborate, complex protection mechanisms that are required to protect cells from some of the very basic necessities of life, namely water, oxygen, and light, certainly complicates the origin of life problem.
And that's extreme understatement.
Yeah, a lot of those.
That's like saying winning an Olympic gold medal is a difficult task.
That's kind of what I saw in those videos. They would take individual pieces and isolate them. but they started with something that they couldn't explain in and of itself. They talked about oxygen toxicity, for example. The early life was anaerobic instead of aerobic, so it didn't need oxygen. And then just somehow one day, one of them just started producing oxygen, photosynthesis. Just, that's super simple, like, they need to have the mechanisms to do so. It just happened. And they built the same protections for oxygen at the same time that they figured out how to produce oxygen from photosynthesis. Okay.
Well, and even in that, it's like, okay, photosynthesis is the fundamental process of life. I mean, we can bring it back to, I mean, you can have, basically there are two of the most basic things of life is photosynthesis, which all life originates from, all carbohydrates start from that and begin with that, or the mineralization, which is some of the deep sea fumaroles and bacteria and such. So there's only two methods, and the one is insanely complicated and the other is insanely complicated, and life can't begin until one or those others happens.
Yeah.
So I mean, like that explanation where it just happened onto photosynthesis. Well, what was it doing before that? There's no source for energy production or metabolism before that. So what was going on before that occurred?
Yeah.
There's no explanation for that.
Yeah. And then they did, none of the videos I mentioned, they talk about the other toxicities. So it's like, okay, I watched this video, and if we have time we can watch it if we want to. It's about how UV destroys the cells. And so they have it under a microscope and put in UV, and certain ones get destroyed a lot quicker, and they just explode. And of course that's a lot quicker because the UV is concentrated, so it happens within a minute, but in other words, it would happen in like hours or days. But so how's it protected from that? And then water.
One thing with the UV is that there's speculation that there's quite a water vapor barrier in the upper atmosphere before the time of Noah, which would have minimized UV radiation before that. It doesn't explain the other issues. In fact, it complicates it because it would increase the oxygen concentrations before that time. So maybe the UV wouldn't be as strong, but the oxygenation would be more of a problem.
Yeah, and then and even further back, before there's the atmosphere and everything, or what they're saying is the anaerobic. They didn't have that atmospheric protection, so it was just bombarded with UV. It's interesting that they say once that cell decided to start producing oxygen, they called it, what do they call it? I'm gonna get it wrong, oxygen crisis or the oxygen. That's basically paraphrasing. There's so much oxygen that all of Earth and life didn't have a way to process it. So there's an overabundance of oxygen, which actually froze the planet. So, okay, I didn't know that. But in these videos, it's interesting because they used to say, I had watched I think it was a newer video. At least when I was growing up, it's 7-8 billion years old the planet is. This is the most recent one I saw. They said it was about 3, and life, complex life, they actually said it just seemed to emerge out of nowhere about, was it 100 million, 500 million years ago? I I'm getting the numbers wrong. And it's like so they keep changing their timelines, and it's like, given mutations and over time, how long it's going to take, and the subsequent systems all at the same time, and how long that would take, knowing how long mutations take, if there's not enough time for ape to man, let alone everything else.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah, Scott sent me a video about that a while ago. That was like the mathematical impossibilities, not just impracticalities, but impossibilities to get to where we are now following this procedure is just mathematically impossible.
I like how they talk about the hundreds of thousands of different processes in the cell. And the cell is incredibly complex. It's wonderful. And a lot of the theories and mindsets and worldviews nowadays are based off of Darwin, and he had no idea.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Well, it's one thing you said earlier about complex life. Okay, there is nothing that is not complex life that is life. There's complex, and then there's even more complex.
Yeah.
It starts at complex.
Yeah.
And then too, it's like, with Darwin, it's like I've said with the internal combustion piston engine, it may not be the best design. It probably is not. But it has had probably $10 trillion worth of development on it over the last 200 years, 150 years. So anything that is going to come along is going to have to overcome an awful lot of development and be able to catch up, even though it may be a superior design. I think that reminds me of Darwinism. It's not an effective, or we're seeing more and more that is not the optimum, to use that term, but it has had so much research and development and argumentation to support it over time that it's going to take a long time for a superior product to be able to match the
Adoption.
Yeah, to overcome that, to be able to overcome the arguments and stuff that have been developed for so many years, and so much invested in that.
Then you wonder, and then you delve into the conspiracy theory realm. But I mean, I think there's an agenda behind it. I think the devil's clever.
Sure.
Right. So you have not just factual, because you can give people facts all day long. I mean, like, look at the early church and the Israelites, and they saw the miracles. Adam and Eve walked with God, and they still rebelled.
Mm-hmm.
So even with 100% proof in front of you, people still won't choose it. So you have to overcome that societal thought and decisions.
And I think that postmodernism is an insanely dangerous thing, that we don't appreciate how destructive that is and how damaging that is.
I agree.
Because, more and more young people are being taught that it's all about emotion and feelings and what you think, and there is no ultimate reality, and therefore facts are irrelevant in many regards to these people. And if logical argument does not persuade you, then that's a dangerous road.
That's a society I think will get easily taken over by outside forces.
Yeah. One thing in this essay that he talks about the toxic oxygen species, which I had to do looked up some terms and stuff on that. That was interesting. That wasn't something that I thought much about or paid much attention to, but I know that for plastics and stuff, ozone is just terribly destructive. And it was just interesting, just kind of correlating that to the damage within the cells, and two, you look at the reactivity of oxygen and the complex chemistry of the cell, and it's easy to see how those toxic oxygen molecules could be produced. And so he didn't really address this, but just thinking about that reactivity and the reactive nature of the elements of the cell, it just points to even an increased necessity for the protective mechanisms in that, because it's almost like it produces its own toxic environment.
Yeah.
I was just thinking of little cells, like a cartoon. They start producing oxygen and they're like, start just blowing up or disintegrating. Have no protection from it. I think how would cells just develop just out of nowhere? Okay, if they, I don't know, devil's advocate, they start producing oxygen. Okay, well, where's the protection? If it's harmful and it's going to destroy it by producing it, so it destroys itself, how does the next one, who happens to just all of a sudden start producing it, not explode? It's not like cells have a brain and they can look and observe.
Yeah. Well, then too, we've come up with a protection plan. Oh, crap. That didn't work.
Yeah.
We killed ourselves. And now we can't use the oxygen.
Yeah.
I thought too, it was interesting on the UV side, and just how he talked about the mechanism for repairing the DNA is cut out, synthesize, and replace. Okay, that's not a simple, with the oxygen deal, it's an enzyme that does this. Okay, well, this is a much more complicated system required to, locate, segregate, cut out, reproduce, and reinsert. That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah.
That's a lot. That's not just a simple, changing a couple of chemicals around.
Yeah.
I wonder what the SOS stands for, because the repair mechanism you're talking about is called SOS, but he never expounds on that. I anticipate that the response to this would be that there are other ways that those mechanisms could have emerged, such as just sheer volume. Because the theory goes that the mutation spontaneously happens, because mutations do spontaneously happen, but given enough time, or perhaps given enough just sheer volume, the mass number of cases where the chances of mutating spontaneously can happen would be there, but I think the response to that would be easy enough to say there isn't enough time, and there obviously hasn't been enough volume to produce those opportunities for that spontaneous mutation.
When you talk about the volume,
Mm-hmm.
okay, seeing how insanely unlikely any of this to happen, and then the necessity of this being for the first life forms,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that volume has got to be absolutely minuscule. You know, the odds of it happening once is insurmountable. So the odds of it happening in large quantity is even smaller.
Well, they would argue that the theory goes that it only needs to happen once, because if it doesn't happen, then they'll just die out. And so the ones that it does happen in, they survive. And so those are the ones that get propagated and flourish.
Right.
So all it needs to happen in is one, and that one survives, and everybody else dies. But that isn't really what we've seen. I mean, I don't know that we've observed that that's what happened. It seems that everybody just it's just in place. It's just there. It's already ready to go. But I'm not a bio.
Yeah, a lot of the terminology they'll say that there must have been, or at some point it created, and because it's all billions of years ago, so they can't when it's going to reproduce it, so it's all just in theory at that point. So SOS, I looked it up. Actually, it just stands for Save Our Souls. Save Our Souls gene.
Okay. I was going to humorously suggest that. Okay.
Yeah, and the mutations, there's mutations, we see that all the time. But every mutation we see isn't an addition of information. It's always a subtraction of information. So the evolutionary model is mutation, and they add up, and it gets more complex, more information, all this stuff. But that's not what's observed at all. It's opposite. With mutations, you have less information, degraded information, damaged genes and cells.
Yeah, even if you give the idea or give credence to the idea that information is built up from time to time through mutations, the vast majority of it is destructive of information. And so even if you accept that that information can be made through that, the degradation of that information over time is going to be far greater in quantity than any information that is produced. And so it's a net negative at the very best.
We still have, even though our body has protections to say like oxygen toxicity, it can't withstand an unlimited amount, and it has to repair. We see people who have oxygen, and they can, and I forget the term now what it's called, but they can get sick from having too much oxygen. So, yeah, stuff people don't think about.
There's a lot of that.
Yeah.
I always thought it's interesting to me. It seems like our cells are smarter than we are in many ways. The regulatory functions, the protection functions, all this stuff that goes on completely beyond our understanding and control. It seems like in many ways our cells are smarter than we are.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, in a lot of ways, our bodies are smarter than we are. I mean, the number of things that our bodies do for us for free, no problem, and like how we abuse them, and, feed garbage into them.
And it's interesting to me that you have societies in tropical areas that 90+% of their diet is, say, fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have societies such as the Eskimo that are like 90% meat and animal fats. It's just, and they all survive. I mean, one may be healthier than the other. I don't know. It's hard to say,
longer, shorter.
But they all survive, and that's just amazing how flexible the human body can be, and there's probably a genetic predispositions in either direction stuff that allow that, but it's really truly remarkable how versatile the human body is.
Yeah.
And I was looking at one of the videos just talking about oxygen, and then too much oxygen in a system can create free radicals because the electrons and the oxygen are pulling off electrons from elsewhere. That free radicals, as we know, is not good. It's caused cancer and all kinds of bad stuff.
One thing that I thought was interesting, a little bit about the photosynthetic bacteria in the ocean, and it's protected by a virus. And that the complexity of that symbiotic relationship is kind of fascinating. We think of viruses as being harmful.
Yeah, there's an example of connotation for you. Virus, you hear the word virus and you think parasite, something that destroys in order to serve itself. But this is a mutual symbiosis. This essay was much more about the telos than even fine-tuning. There's a little bit of fine-tuning in the beginning where he mentions that if the oxygen content in our atmosphere were just a few percent higher than its current 21%, the potential for devastating forest fires and an unstable explosive atmosphere would increase significantly, making life less likely to thrive on Earth. But I think that's the only example of fine-tuning of conditions. Most everything else is drawing a intended design or an intended purpose out of mechanisms and processes that are observed in nature surrounding oxygen, water, and light.
Well, he does talk about, too, a little bit in the bottom of page 60. However, oxygen plays a major role in filtering out the harmful UV light rays from the sun. So that implies a fine-tuning there to some degree, I would say.
I mean, not that fine-tuning is necessary, it's just that's more what I expected, I suppose, from this.
I think it applies to a lot of design. Because not only must cells possess repair and protection mechanisms to prevent oxygen light damage, they must also be designed to handle the detrimental effects of water. So all three of those have to be present.
Yeah.
And so, that design is implicitly just stated there, implied there. as evidence for a designer.
Well, certainly there's design apparent. You know, these things that are necessary appear not to be. I mean, they're so complex, and they don't appear to be easily, you know, just spontaneous. Especially considering how necessary they are, and not only necessary but simultaneous. It's not like you can have one for a little while, but you do eventually need the other one. No, you need all of these together, or things won't work out.
And even at that level, just saying that you had to have these protections all simultaneously, I mean, we understand that, but what it takes to actually accomplish that within the cell, with the different processes that each different process has among itself, is that's just.
Yeah. Like, just start out.
Okay, kind of the basics of what do we need for life? You know, we got DNA, you got a cell wall, you got, start with 100 proteins.
Amino acids.
Below that. You got UV protection. Water control. You got the oxygen. You got energy. Metabolism. All of this, you got repair mechanisms. That's just
A couple.
that's just barely touching the surface.
Yeah.
All that's gonna happen simultaneously, or virtually simultaneously, for any kind of life to emerge. And each one of those is insanely complex. The DNA, the DNA, you've got replication mechanisms. You've got the protein synthesis. You've got identification markers. You know, there's so many pieces to all of that that you know, when you combine everything, it's just the whole concept.
I think it goes underneath.
You know, just that whole concept of abiogenesis, it becomes ludicrous. I just, you know, the more I study this, the more I just think, you know, it's a good thing that Crick and his compatriots were on LSD.
Okay.
I mean, for you to believe this stuff, it's just, you gotta be in fantasy land.
Yeah, I agree. And we can even just the simplest simplest form of life, just, you have the amino acids in the right combination to make just a single protein. We can't even come near to that. I mean, you have both the left and right hand versions of it. You have all the toxicities and everything, and the environment that it's in, the early environment of Earth. They call it what do they say, a soup puddle or whatever.
Mhm.
We're in a lab with clean environments, with perfect elements, perfect resources, and
We can't do it.
we can't even do it. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, and like I said, that's just touching the surface. That's not even, I mean, you have a PhD biologist, chemical biologist, and he'd had probably 4 times that many things on there.
Yeah, I mean the thousands of processes in one cell alone. It's like,
Yeah, and each of those is insanely complex.
And has nuances of their own, like the shapes.
Regulatory
Yeah.
elements. And
Yeah.
all of that.
and then I think just what's amazing is the DNA in the bacteria itself. Any cell, this first cell, where did that DNA come from? Who created that information?
Yeah.
It just self-assembled. DNA is huge. To think that there was hundreds of millions or billions of different nature combinations to put together a DNA to get it right, to get it to function and to work like the 1 in a trillion. It's just
Well, and then, we talk about DNA, but without the rest of the mechanisms, it's useless.
Yeah.
It's absolutely, utterly useless. It's just a sign with nobody to read it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A sign out in the wilderness where no one's ever developed language. It's completely and utterly useless. It's like this evolution is this ultra marathon obstacle course, and the first obstacle is jumping over the moon.
That's a good analogy. I hadn't thought of that before, but that's a really good analogy.
All of these things, just put together, it just reinforces more and more, just God's wisdom and God's providence and His just absolute, unfathomable intelligence.
Yeah, definitely.
Because not only did He have to set this up and figure this out, but He had to put the fundamental physical laws in place that would regulate and control all of this and know all of the implications and effects of all of this before He put anything on this earth, before He created the universe.
They're totally different systems that are codependent, but the systems among themselves are just, the statistics are astronomical. So the cells just themselves with evolution, and then all the fine tuning in the universe and everything, and combine. I mean, yeah, crazy.
Well, he authored all of it. I mean, he didn't have to figure anything out. Like, he just made it all up.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like there were some set of rules that he had to follow. He wrote the rules.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
It's like
he wrote the rules, and he had to formulate how all of this was going to work and interact with those rules and with those establishments, and it's just like, we can't even begin
Yeah, it's so elegant.
we can't even begin to fathom what he put into place, let alone imagining how it could just happen. John, you seem kind of quiet this morning.
I haven't had any coffee, that's why. I was in a hurry to get out the door. Do we want to consider next week's essay? I think last week we talked about how Darwinism dumbs us down. We also kind of talked about a little bit of possibly doing two, or we could just stick to the one.
I won't be here next week, so.
I won't either. Debbie and Randy will be. And then Debbie will be gone again the week after next. So I think Debbie was the one interested in the how Darwinism dumbs us down.
Yeah, so why don't we save that for when she's going to be around?
Yeah, she'll be here next week, and then she said she'll be out the week after. So okay, so I can prep how Darwinism dumbs us down, evolution and postmodernism. It's kind of what we talked about today a little bit. Postmodernism and the lack of any objective grounding.
Yeah, I read that ahead of time, and it was interesting. In some ways, a kind of an esoteric argument, okay, yeah, I can kind of see that, but
Yeah.
I think it's valid. But I think there's a convergence of what works in reality. So,
Any thoughts on what you might be interested in studying next term? Is there anything in particular that you feel would be beneficial? We talked about doing cold case Christianity, which is entirely focused on the historical reliability of the Gospels from like a criminal investigation kind of lens. We've also kind of tossed around the idea of studying church history. I don't want to. I mean, there are books that I would love to dive into, but they're like $50-$60. Like Theistic Evolution would be a great book to study, but I don't want to ask people to drop $75 on a book. Same with Natural Theology, Blackwell's Companion to Natural Theology. I paid $50 for that, and it's paperback.
Oh man.
Hardback is like $200,
Oh.
but I think it's because it's just not in print.
Yeah.
They only printed like so few of them, and so I think it's mostly in like academic circulation.
I'm not sure where to go. To me, I feel like we've covered an awful lot of ground, and
Well, that's a good point to make. What have we not covered? I think probably the biggest thing we have not covered is cultural apologetics. We've dabbled a little bit in it here and there, but not like directly.
right.
So that's something we could try. If you like the format of Evidence for God, where we do just like topic to topic, week to week, we could of course stick to Evidence for God. We still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. We still have 22 essays we could go through. I have another book from William Lane Craig where it's just questions and answers, where each chapter is someone submitting a question to reasonable faith, and Dr. Craig responds.
That sounds kind of interesting. I mean,
And that covers everything from the Bible to culture. Like, can you be a gay Christian? So he has a whole response to that. So we've looked at that. So that's an option.
And I was talking with John, and he bought Biblical Christianity, Truth or Delusion by Mark Hanna. And so I bought it so I can read it with him. And it looks really, I was like, I looked up the chapters and I was like, oh, we could like totally like what we're doing with this book, do that, or just read it through. But it's a refutation of contemporary arguments against the Christian faith. This is with specific references to the recent book, The Christian Delusion. I'll bring it in.
Sure. Yeah, we can take a look at that.
So that looks pretty good.
yeah, I like what you said about the societal elements. I think that's something that
Yeah, I like that.
possibly more pertinent.
Yeah, there's a book, I want to say it was Paul Copan who wrote it, or maybe it was Greg Kokel. I'm not sure who the author is, but it's Cultural Apologetics. It's literally the title of the book is Cultural Apologetics, and how how we can reach people through cultural issues and not so much intellectual defenses.
Paul Gould.
Who wrote?
Paul Gould?
Yeah, that's the one. Paul Gould. The name doesn't ring a bell. But I recognize the cover. I think someone at EPS recommended it.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yes, that's a good option.
Lots of lots. Yeah, that'd be an interesting topic.
Okay, so for next week, we'll do the How Darwinism Dumbs Us Down, Evolution, and Postmodernism. So you said you'd be out next week? Okay. Yeah, I'll be in service during second service for the Mother's Day baby dedication thing.
How's your daughter doing?
She's doing well. She's making developmental leaps and bounds. She's very excited to walk.
Yeah.
Her favorite thing is standing and kind of cruising on furniture and stuff.
Yeah. How old is she now?
She's 9 months.
Okay.
She'll be 10 months on the 18th.
That's cool. Yeah, it's funny. I walked pretty early. My son walked pretty early. My dad walked at 5 months.
Wow, that is very early. She doesn't seem to enjoy crawling very much. Like, she'll do it if she has to,
Yeah.
but she'll
Not a pastime. Huh?
yeah, she'll crawl and like vocalize like, I don't like this. But as soon as you like take her hands and kind of stand her up, she's just like, yeah, this is great. So, shall we close with prayer?
Sure.
Father, we love you. We thank you for this time. Lord, I just pray that you would open our eyes, open the eyes of our hearts to the amazing things in our world that you reveal yourself to us through. Lord, I pray that our eyes would be open to those who need to see these truths. Lord, I pray that you would give us the words to speak and be ever on our hearts. In Jesus' name.